I want to thank each one of you for being here this evening. Because your being here means that we, the people, still have the strength, the honor, and the courage necessary to regain control of our government. And regain control we can and we must. You know, many of our founding fathers gave their lives for us to have freedom. And many of our relatives, our neighbors, our friends, and our neighbors' friends give their lives for us to have freedom. And Democrat national leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., John and Robert Kennedy, gave their lives to gain and maintain our freedom. And Republican national leader Ronald Reagan almost gave his life to remind us that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like living in the United States, where men were free. But for the last 28 plus years, our Republican and Democrat national leaders have been trading, selling, regulating, taking, and giving away our freedom. Now, when I tell people this, most will pause and they'll think about it for a moment, and then most will agree with me. But there are some who will say, well, they're not really sure they're losing their independence, sovereignty, freedom, and liberty. And to those individuals, I say, well, you know, you have to recognize that because of the enormous growth in the size and the scope of our federal government, it is becoming a destructive entity. It is destroying the 5 basic wants and needs of a free and independent people, and therefore country. With over 1,000 federal agencies, bureaus, and organizations, making and enforcing over 34,000 rules, regulations, and laws, it's destroying the first want and need. And that is for the people to be able to live their lives without their government telling them how. And within prudent foreign trade agreements, it's destroying the second want and need, and that is the opportunity for work that'll provide a means for the people to care for themselves, their families, and their futures. And by not securing our borders, it's destroying the third want and need, and that is for the people to have the security to live their lives without fear. Fear of intrusion by terrorists, and fear of intrusion by disease. And by dictating national education policies, such as the Common Core, it's destroying the fourth want and need. And that is for the people to have a voice in the education of their children and faith in their opportunities. And with unbridled and uncontrolled spending caused by the enormous growth in the size and scope of our federal government, it is destroying the fifth want and need of a free and independent people. And that is for the people to have a voice in how much they are taxed and how those taxes are used. And then I warn the individuals that I'm speaking with that if the free and independent people of our great nation do not unite and stand up and demand a large reduction in the size and the scope of our federal government, they will not be a free and independent people for much longer. Well, then I have their undivided attention. And they'll say, well, yeah, that makes sense, but how is this happening and what means are our leaders using? And I say, well, the how is through apathy. You see, if the majority of the people are unconcerned and therefore unaware about what our national leaders are doing, then they can pretty much do whatever comes to their minds that they believe will allow them to acquire the things that they want for their political party and for themselves. But the means by which they are doing it is twisting, turning, and ignoring the greatest single governing document that's ever been written, the Constitution of the United States. And then I offer an example. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of our Constitution concerns treaties. And it states, the President shall have power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to enter into treaties, provided that 2/3 of the senators present concur. Now, our founding fathers wrote this clause to prevent treaties from being implemented which would benefit a single state, a group of states, or any other minority entities, but be detrimental to the majority of the people, and therefore the United States. But modern leaders twist and turn this clause and ignore it. And they use a process called Congressional Executive Agreement, whereby only a simple majority of both houses and the President's signature is required to enter into treaties, which may benefit a single state, but be detrimental to the United States. Now, I'm sure all of you all remember a certain treaty by the name of NAFTA. Well, this process was challenged in the courts in 2001 because of the effects of NAFTA. But because the majority of the people were apathetic, no real political pressure was brought to bear upon the courts or the politicians. Therefore, the process continues today. Now, matter of fact, in October of 2012, Republican U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, covertly, of course, because that seems the way they get things done in Washington these days, covertly. I think it's unnecessary, but it seems the way they do it. But he was able to push through free trade agreements with South Korea, Brazil, Colombia, and Panama. And it was just a few days later that Senator McConnell, after the president had signed the agreement, that Senator McConnell proudly announced that all the Toyota Camrys that go into South Korea would come from Kentucky. Now that sounds great for Kentucky, but what are the long-term effects of South Korea, Brazil, Colombia, and Panama flooding the American markets with lower-cost products and services? Two things. One, more lost American jobs, and two, more trade deficits. Now, I recognize that many of our national economists, they say we only have a $55 to $60 billion a year trade deficit with the rest of the world. And that's not very much when you consider the size of our economy. Ladies and gentlemen, that's simply impossible. You see, you can't have a trade deficit of $140 billion a year with Mexico and Canada, and a $200 to $280 billion a year trade deficit with China, and still only have a $55 to $60 billion a year trade deficit. Now, the fact is all the information that I can gather from organizations such as the American Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, and the Oasis Organization suggests that our true deficit is somewhere between $214 and $264 billion a year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of trade deficit. Now, when I share this with people, someone will say, well, wow, how has this happened? And what are the effects? Well, the first thing I must admit, I'm not an economist. However, I have developed a common sense theory of economics that I call funnel economics. And it's really quite simple. You see, it starts out with a basic premise that whenever a small economy and a large economy enter into a free trade agreement, the small economy is always going to come out on top. And the reason being is that the small economy can always produce the goods and services at such a lower cost, and with the free trade agreement, they are able to push them into the large economy. And because the people in the large economy are always looking for good deals, they're going to buy them. And the more they buy, the lesser the demand is for the locally produced products. Therefore, more lost jobs. And because them small economies, they really can't buy an equal amount of products from the large economy, trade deficit develops. Now here's the big picture where the funnels come in. Imagine two funnels sitting on top of each other. One has a narrow opening shaft, the other has a larger opening shaft. The one on the top represents money coming into our country for our exports. The one on the bottom represents money leaving our country for our imports. And of course, our economy is going around and around inside the funnel. Now, it doesn't take an economic genius to realize it's not going to be long before that funnel is empty. Now, people ask me, they say, well, gosh, with all the products that we see today, none of them seems to be made in America. How is it the funnel's not already empty? And I say, well, two things, and neither one of them are very good. One, first you've got to acknowledge that our federal government has been dumping between $70 and $50 billion a month into our phone. And then the next question you should ask, of course, would be, where's the money coming from? Two places. Neither one of them are good. One, our Treasury Department is sending Treasury notes over to the Federal Reserve Bank. Now you got to understand, it's all part of the same thing. It's all, it's all the same big thing, right? And then they're dumping between $22 and $25 billion a month into the fund. Now, the other part, which is the biggest hunk, we're borrowing. You see, China is pretty intelligent people. See, not only are they pulling somewhere around $280 billion a year out of our economy because of our trade deficit, but they're also getting principal and interest off the $400 billion a year that they're lending us. So they're double dipping. But I got a solution. I'll give you just a moment. So, if you take into consideration that we've got a $214 to $264 billion a year deficit, and the fact that we got a federal government over here that spends money kind of like pouring water out of a bucket, it's easy to see how we have almost $1 trillion a year deficit. $1 trillion. I don't have enough fingers. Actually, it does take 12. So then what is the solution? I mean, we know that there's problems, right? But what is the solution? Well, three things. And none of them are going to be easy. The reason being because not only fighting, I hate to use the term fighting, let me say confronting. We're not only confronting Republicans and Democrats, we're also confronting the status quo. And that's one of the hardest things in the world to confront, is the status quo. Everybody likes doing things that they've always done. But these three things have to happen. Okay? First, we must reduce the size and scope of our federal government. And not just because they're spending money, like pouring water out of a bucket, but also because they're trading, selling, regulating, and taking away the people's independence, sovereignty, freedom, and liberty. And I'm not talking about, tremendous cuts. We're talking about 3.5% a year for 7 years. And I'm not talking about dollars and cents, I'm talking about actually people. Because when you cut people, you cut more than dollars and cents, because you're talking about not just the salaries, but you're talking about retirement benefits, and you're talking about the operation costs. So 3.5% a year, and we're not talking about laying off a single soul. Our workforce is getting older. So we're talking about retiring 3.5% of the people a year and not backfilling the positions. Now, we take 85% of that money that we save and we put it back into our general fund. This keeps us from having to borrow. We take 15% of it and we put it into our Social Security trust fund, and we make it a trust fund. Okay? Because we're going to have a lot of people retiring over the next few years, so we're going to need that money. All right, so we reduce the size and scope of the federal government, by 3.5% a year for 7 years. Now, the collateral effect of that is really beautiful, because what it does is it rebuilds trust and confidence of the people in their government, because the government is doing the right thing. Therefore, the people regain trust and confidence. We all know it's about the bottom of the barrel. I mean, 17% or something like that for Congress. That's pretty bad. So anyhow, that takes care of the government part. Then we have to work on our trade agreements. Okay? We have to rewrite our trade agreements. No country's economy can survive a $214 to $264 billion a year trade deficit. You just can't do it. And we have to get to pass this concept of free trade. Because you see, free trade can only work if all the economies of the world were relatively the same size per capita. Then it can work equitably. Otherwise, somebody's always coming out on the bottom. And over the last 7, 8, 10 years, it's us. We're coming out on the bottom. Okay? So we have to rewrite our trade agreements. Now, here's how we turn it around on the Chinese. We place additional tariffs on the Chinese products coming into our country. We use 85% of that money to pay back to the Chinese. Right? I mean, that's what they're doing to us. They're double dipping in our economy, so let's pay back to the Chinese. That's part of the money we borrow. I mean, that's the way it works, right? Now, we take the other 15% and we offer it as tax incentives to bring back American companies back into our country. Now, if these companies say, hey, we're not coming back, we're making way too much money down here. Okay, we're going to have to put a tariff on your products. Then we're going to take that money with the 15% that we've got from the Chinese, and what we're going to do is we're going to offer that as tax incentives to keep American companies in here and to develop new American companies that can compete. You know, 4 years ago, someone asked me, how are we going to compete with the Chinese? I said, we can't. You know, everybody else says, hey, better technology, you know. We can't. How are you going to compete with somebody that's making $400 a month for manufacturing workers and $600 a month for high-tech workers? How can America compete with that? We can't. The only way we can do it is we have to subsidize. And the only way we're going to subsidize is with the Chinese money. We turn it around. So we've taken care of that part. Now, the third part is very important. Okay, we must stop and insist that our national leaders stop twisting, turning, and ignoring our Constitution in order to accomplish their political party agendas and personal agendas. Now, the only way I know to do that is to send constitutionalists to Washington. And that's why I'm running for the U.S. Congress under the Constitution Party. I am a constitutionalist. I believe if we will stick to our Constitution and quit twisting and turning it, I think our country can fix itself. Because we've overcome many, many, many things. Most of us have experienced tremendous things in our life. We've already overcome them. So I know we can do it. So see, the question that each of you have to ask each other, yourselves, and everybody else, is really simple. Shall we be a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people? Or shall we be a nation of the few, by the few, and for the few? For the latter is exactly where our Republican and Democrat national leaders have been and will continue to lead us. Now, I recognize these things, and I know some people say, well, you know what, that's pretty extreme. Well, we're in a crisis, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need the same old politics anymore. What we need are statesmen. What we need are individuals who can see the picture. We need people who have strength of consciousness, strength of character, honor of word, and a true conviction to the founding principles and ideas of our country. That's what we need. Now, some people have parts of them. You know, they may have strength of character, and they may have caring and concern for the people. But do they have the strength of consciousness necessary to see the real problem? Because everybody knows, hey, if all I'm looking at are the symptoms, I'm never going to fix the problem. We have to see the problems and we have to overcome them. So what I ask of people is to share this information with everyone. This is the third time that I've run for Congress. And believe me, it's not something that's enjoyable to do. But something's got to be done. Someone's got to have the courage to go up to Washington and tell them we cannot do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. I believe it was Einstein who says that was the definition of insanity. But yet we do it. We send the same representatives back up there again, and we send them again, and we send them again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a working man. That's why I apologize for being late, because my work kept me longer than I anticipated this evening. But because I'm a working man, I understand the wants and the needs of working people. I've often wondered, how is it that we send extremely wealthy men to Washington? people who have known wealth most of all their life. How can they know the working man? So we, like I say, what we must do, in my opinion, is we must send constitutionalists to Washington. Okay? And I am a constitutionalist. And I appreciate your vote for Congress. And I will do whatever I have to do. If it means standing up on the desk of the House Speaker's desk and jumping up and down and saying, hey, why are you forgetting the people? Why you forget that the people are the sovereignty of our country? It's not the Congress, it's not the President, it is the people. They're the sovereignty. We must fire up the people. The people must understand that we are the ultimate authority. All of us, the people. We are. On my signs you can see, we the people. I say that because it is us. We are the sovereignty. It's not the leaders. Okay? It's not the people that are in Washington. It's not the people who are running Washington. It's the people. And I believe that we must send individuals to Washington who will never forget who they are and where they come from. I know a lot of people have said that in the past, and they get up to Washington. I've had people ask me, what will allow them to believe that I'm going to go to Washington and not be just like the rest of them? Strength of character. Strength of character. Strength of consciousness. I see what the effects have been of our leaders. Oh, everything's fine. We're not worried about anything. Everything's just dandy. I've seen the effect of that. I see our unemployment rate, they say it's 6-point-something%. I know better than that. I see too many people. I travel my work all day, every day. I know it's greater than that. It's much greater than that. I see businesses closing down everywhere I go. But they're telling us that the economy is coming back. But, ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing that I heard long ago, and I believe it today. You cannot trade, sell, regulate, and give away the farms to have it. It's that simple. The people must stand together and demand that they return sovereignty to them. That's the only way they're going to give it back. We've got to fight the status quo. Now that may seem radical, but hey, when you're in the middle of a crisis, it takes dramatic action. All of you who have served in the military, you know that. When you're in the crisis, what it takes. You know what it takes. I served in the Air Force in Vietnam, so I know what's going on. So, I mean, look, we have got to get up, people. We've got to let people who say, hey, look, well, I'm kind of too busy this week. I really can't get involved. I left a fellow yesterday who said something like that to me. You know what I said to him? I said, so it's more important, and it was something silly, something trivial. I said, it's more important then to do that than to do whatever you can to save your country. And I just walked away. You men who have served in the military, or if any women have, you know what I'm talking about. It's called dedication to a cause. I am absolutely dedicated to the cause of independence, sovereignty, freedom, and liberty for the people and for our country. And whatever it takes to get it done, I'm going to continue to do it. I thank y'all for listening, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you got.